And coming up on today's Green Signal, Your Railway podcast, our election special. We review the rail policies of the main parties. The Conservatives continue with their Network North plan, really. The Labour Party continues with their Get Britain Moving plan. And one party manifesto had Richard needing to go outside for some fresh air after reading it. But there's some good news too. TfL has ordered 10 new Aventra trains from Alstom to secure the future of the Derby Litchurch Lane site. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, here in truly lovely Lincolnshire this morning. It's very sunny and
me, Richard Bowker. It's also lovely and sunny down here, so I think the whole country's bathed in sun today, isn't it, Nigel?
Either that or it's shining on the righteous. We'll leave our viewers and listeners to decide. So we've got so much to get through today. Let's crack on with the super thanks we've received and for which we are so grateful, and they're coming thicker and faster. Your generosity last week was just humbling. So here we go with our amazing list of super fans. They are Zach Shaler, Chris Exley, Brian Kennedy, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Mervyn Partin, John Brown, Stephen Hutton, and for at least the third time, Stephen Pritchard. Stephen also left us this fantastic comment. He said, "Happy to contribute. It is better value than a magazine. You are both clearly passionate about the industry and take time to engage with your audience." Thank you, Stephen. We are indeed passionate about our industry and indeed our podcast, and we do our best to answer every email and YouTube comment, even if it's getting a bit difficult sometimes these days, thanks to the sheer volume. But we will carry on doing so, because if someone's taken the trouble to leave a comment, the least we can do is recognise and acknowledge it.
Absolutely. I think part of the reason for those volume of comments, Nigel, is your comment on the last week's show about Flying Scotsman's livery and everything. But I'm sure we'll come on to that. That generated about 98% of the mailbag. We also had a great comment from Stu Todd via email, who said, "Hello, team. Thank you for your fantastic podcasts. I love listening to them on my train through southern New Zealand." Well, thanks, Stu. We certainly reach the parts that of the world that other podcasts can only dream of. And actually, I wonder if you are listening and you're in somewhere,
good idea.
sort of remote. Let us know. We've got New Zealand. We've got our friend who drives his ute through Tassie in Australia. We've got definitely got some listeners in New York, Prague. We know we've got. Just let us know. That'd be fantastic.
It really would. So do that, please, and we can give you a mention. And thanks to everyone for their comments on last week's show. Some said, keep Flying Scotsman in exactly the configuration it is now. Anything else would be mad. It would. Plenty of others, however, said it was sacrilege or words to that effect, and that it should be restored to LNER Apple Green single chimney, no smoke deflectors appearance as an urgent act. One contributor even described it in his current configuration as, and I quote, a pile of junk, which I thought was a bit over the top. Anyway, by and large, the debate was in pretty good humour, so thanks for all your comments.
Yeah, with emphasis on the by and large there, I think. But
he's doing a lot of heavy lifting, his by and large there.
It certainly was. Big week, of course, because the King published his birthday honours, and we saw a really great deal of recognition for railway folk in them. Sometimes it can be a bit sparse. This year it was anything but. We'll publish the full list on our website. There's almost too many to go through them all, so please don't feel we're picking out any over any others. But there's a couple that are worthy of mention. Ian Stewart, the MP for Milton Keynes South, the chair of the Transport Select Committee, was awarded a CBE for.
I'm really pleased to see that one.
Absolutely delighted. Shamit Weinberg Geiger, CEO of the West Coast Partnership, got an OBE for services to the rail sector. So well done, Shamit. Paula Durrans, Head of Security at Great Western Railway for services to the railway, got an MBE. And the ones I really like, they're sometimes called the smaller honours. Then they're for people who do an amazing job. So we got some brilliant ones here. Sigil Cragwell, I think known as Siggy, excuse me, station assistant at Thameslink Railway for Public Service. That was a BEM, British Empire Medal.
I was especially delighted to see that one, Richard, because I know Siggy a bit. He was a very popular National Rail Awards winner a few years ago.
Right.
So to see him picking up an even bigger honour, because it is possible to have a bigger honour than a National Rail Award, that's really good.
It was brilliant, wasn't it? And can't mention Siggy without mentioning his colleague Joe Healy, also station manager at Thameslink Railway, who was awarded BEM actually in last year's honours, but because he's an Irish national, the honour had to be ratified by the Irish government, which it was. So that's been confirmed this year. So look, there was loads more. We've listed them all on the site. Congratulations to all the honours recipients.
Absolutely. Big names, smaller names. It's good to see the railway acknowledged. Okay, let's move on. If you hadn't noticed, we've got a general election campaign underway.
Really?
We have, Richard.
Sorry. Okay.
In the last week or so, all the main parties have released their manifestos. So we thought we'd do a quick review of what's in and what's not in, possibly an emphasis on the latter. We've got Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, Reform, and the Greens. Richard, you've been having some fun digging into that lot, I imagine.
I have. I've read quite a few of these things over the years, and normally you sort of have to kind of almost feel like you're sticking your fingers in a plug to get, to wake yourself up again. But not this year. There were some quite interesting ones. I had to go and, as you said at the top of the show, I had to go and take a short walk for one of them to actually convince myself I really had read what I thought I'd just read. And I had. But since, quite a few people have taken a lot of trouble to write some quite remarkable tosh, they do deserve us taking the time to read it and realise that it is actually a load of tosh sometimes.
To a considerable degree, it has to be said. Tosh is about the kindest I could describe it. So let's crack on. So the main parties. It's a bit hard to know who the main parties are these days, isn't it?
We'll come to that.
One hopes is not tosh. What about the Conservatives, the party of government?
Yeah, well, this isn't tosh. You might not agree with it, of course. That's a different point. But it's fairly safe. It's very predictable. It's relatively straightforward. As I guess they kind of just reiterate most of the things we've heard before on the stuff that they said they are going to carry on doing. How many times we heard, I've got a plan and I'm sticking to it.
Recycled tosh, one might say.
Well, that's certainly something I couldn't possibly comment. So, things that were there, cancelling of HS2 and committing to spend all the money on other schemes in the North, reconfirming the Network North command paper that was there. There's loads of stuff that still doesn't stack up, Nigel, for me. We're going to electrify the North Wales coastline for £1 billion. I don't think anybody believes that particular number, but anyway, they say they're going to do it. This one...
Lots about potholes, I understand.
Loads about potholes. Actually, that's
Pottles?
really...
What's a pottle?
I don't know what a pottle is. That's a really good point. I mean, there's a load of stuff in here
Pottles.
about... calm down. There's a load of stuff here about motorists. There is even a backing drivers bill, which they promise, that will stop road pricing, reverse Labour's ultra-low emission zone expansion in London, and rule out top-down low-traffic neighbourhoods and 20-mile-an-hour zones. So it's very motorist-friendly. That's actually a very...
So they didn't actually use the tired expression, war on the motorists, then?
No, another party did that, but they may have done, but that didn't leap out.
And let's not forget the recommitment to reopening beaching lines.
Do you know, there's a line in the manifesto which talks, it actually says this, reopen beaching lines. I mean, who knew that was a thing, right? Anyway, reopen beaching lines and stations to reconnect communities around the country, building on the success of the Dartmoor line in South in the southwest.
Which wasn't even a beach enclosure.
Quite. So, I mean, I think this is dog whistle politics at its most cynical, really, because actually they announced this 4 years ago as restoring your railways, and have done
the square root
of not a lot
of sod all, might say. And interestingly, you're right about dog whistle politics. What's cynical about that? It's aimed squarely at the media, who, for some reason, when they hear about beaching reopenings, go mad for a world of Miss Marple and Agatha Christie and Enid Blyton, and go into a state of group fantasy about this and forget all the important stuff on offer.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. There's a couple of other things. There's one thing that was really good, which has nothing to do with trains, but it was in the transport section, so I'll mention it anyway. They say they're going to ensure that the £2 bus fare cap will continue through the life of the next parliament if they are elected.
Well, that's good news.
That is a very good thing. That's probably done more to stimulate rising bus usage in the last 2 or 3 years than anything else. So actually, fair play, and that's a good commitment.
And I'm sure they didn't miss the opportunity to be critical of everything that Labour's thinking of as part of its own manifesto.
No, they didn't. Before I get to that, though, there's one other point which is worth bearing in mind. They say their savings from their new plan for Euston will see 10,000 new homes. It's freed up 6.5 billion for transport across the rest of the country. Now, I can't quite make it 6.5 billion, and they've also had to recently accept that public money is going to be used to pay for the tunnels to Euston anyway. So that was just a bit of a weird one.
What are they going to do? 2 platforms and a bus shelter?
It's a good point. No, it's going to be led by the sort of the dynamic private sector, as we know. But to your point about knocking Labour, they say this: we are the only party with a credible plan for rail reform. Labour's incoherent and ideological nationalisation plan would put the trade unions in charge, continuing to prolong unaffordable and unfair working practices which are unjustifiable to the public. I don't normally make political points, but this from a government that's been in power for 14 years. So kind of what he's been doing. But look, other than that, it's fairly as predicted.
Okay, let us move on to Labour. What about their plans? We both rather liked their rail policy when Lou Haig announced it a couple of months ago, didn't we?
We did. I think it's important to say in this that although from what you've just heard on the Conservative one, and what you might hear on the Labour one now, we're not offering a political view about this. We're just kind of commenting what's in their policy.
We're holding a mirror up to what's there.
Absolutely. I suppose I was a little disappointed with the Labour one because there's not very much in the manifesto. However, it does say, we've told you what we're going to do with rail. We published a document, I think it was on the 25th of April, called Get Britain Moving, and that's what we're going to do. So, I suppose they've avoided that nuisance of repeating everything they've already said. So the manifesto says we've explained what we're going to do and we're going to do it. And that's, I suppose that's pretty clear, isn't it?
And did Pottles feature?
Pottles did feature. So they're going to save, I think they're going to defer or cancel, I'm not sure which, the A27 bypass, which from memory is the one around Arundel in Sussex. Which was going to cost a few £100 million, and they're going to fix an additional 1 million potholes across England. So that Pottles did make an appearance, but everything else is exactly as you would expect. Ongoing role for open access operations is in their summary list, so that's an interesting phrase.
New passenger watchdog as well, I understand.
Which is, do you remember Lou's comment about being, I think, what was it, passenger in chief?
Yes, so Lou said that, didn't she? Yeah.
There's nothing. If I say there's nothing new in the summary, it's only because they've said we've said it, and that's what we're going to do. So I suppose that's pretty straightforward.
And then we've got all sorts of box ticking going on, haven't we, about promoting sustainable aviation fuels.
And there was one about encouraging airspace modernisation. I didn't realise you could modernise. No, I don't know what that means either, but they're going to do it anyway.
Lib Dems. Has Ed Davey flung himself off the roof of a train or had himself lashed to the track or something? He seems to be going for big.
I mean, it's not
stunts.
for us to comment. Yeah, it's not for us really to comment on how you run a campaign, but it is kind of unusual, isn't it? Like, one thing after another.
There was a very funny tweet the other day. There's some device that catapults somebody out into the middle of the lake, and somebody had tweeted, Ed's got it booked for next week.
Harsh.
Right, so, but actually, more seriously, let's be serious for a minute. Lib Dems have long had a policy of public transport support. So has that continued in their manifesto this time?
Yes, but it's less specific than the Conservative manifesto or the Labour Party one. So when you look at the Conservative and Labour Party one, whatever your views on them and their politics and what they're proposing to do, it's pretty traditional and it's reasonably detailed, because even the Labour one says, go and look at our quite detailed plan. The Lib Dem one, it's not. It's a bit what I would call bit motherhood and apple pie. So they're nice statements, but you kind of go, well, what does that actually mean? So I'll give you just one example, right? They're going to freeze rail fares and simplify ticketing on public transport to ensure regular users are paying fair and affordable prices. So freeze, great. How long? Is that a week? 5 years? Who are these regular users? What is fair? And who defines what's affordable? Because what person A thinks is affordable and person B thinks affordable might be two very different things. So it was all warm and fuzzy, but didn't really say anything. And that's just one example.
But the regular users thing, surely it's equally, if not more important, to attract new users to grow the market.
Well, that's true. But there's another example of this which had me a bit sort of bemused. They say they're going to urgently establish a new rail agency, which presumably is GBR or something like it. It'll be a public body which would help to join up the industry. I mean, help. How about sort it out? But anyway, from track to train, putting commuters first. Why just them in a week when we've actually heard that commuting season tickets are at the lowest level ever? Holding train companies to account and bringing in wholesale reform of the broken fare system. So there's nothing in that you kind of go, that's just wrong, but it just feels a bit limp. And honestly, the best way I could describe it, having read Conservatives and Labour, which felt like A-level papers, this feels like GCSE at best. It's that sort of level of difference, really.
You mentioned season tickets there, Richard. I mean, a story broke yesterday on some ORR figures, which said that only 13% of journeys are now made using season tickets as more people work from home. And new figures from the ORR reveal that season tickets accounted for just that 13% in the 12 months to March. Before the pandemic, 34%.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think a couple of things to remember.
And yet the Liberals want to put them first.
Yeah, well, hence that's. I think that was. I don't think they've thought that through. I think that's just
perish the thought.
True. I mean, 13% is still a very big number if you're talking about 1.6 billion, right? But yeah, the mix has changed. What I found quite encouraging on it, its total journeys are very, very close to what they were before. It's just that the mix has shifted, and that means that the railways are as important as ever before, but just in a slightly different way.
That's right. Which makes fares reform and ticketing even more important.
Even more.
Right. Let's move to, I nearly said lunatic fringe then, I mustn't say that. Who would have thought a month ago that reform would need to be included in this list, not least because they're apparently polling better than the Conservatives in some opinion polls. Politics just does continue to amaze, I think is the politest way of putting. Have you been impressed by anything Reform have said, Richard, or had any impact on you?
Well, definitely the latter. Yes, it has had an impact, because I would say I've been amazed, right? Let's just talk first about what they say about transport. So it's in the section of their contract. Now, interestingly, it's not a manifesto.
Contract with the people.
It's a contract with the people. Now, there are logic for that is because manifestos are just like, untrue and not committed to and not delivered. So we're going to have a contract, right? So it is that of itself kind of flags this is going to be a bit different. And in the section on transport and infrastructure, they have quite a lot of things which are, I would describe them as quite sort of shouty and a bit sort of angry. There's kind of a, what we need is a good old dose of common sense sort of stuff is kind of the approach. And they've split what they're going to do in the first 100 days. I mean, it reads like a new sort of leadership team taking over, a new CEO taking over a company. My first 100 days, I will do this. So it says critical reforms in the first 100 days. 1, scrap HS2, save 25 billion by scrapping the rest of this bloated vanity project.
What's that mean? I mean, vanity project, it's a very common thing, but if you accept it's about politicians, vanity means they want to open it and but the people who launch it never get to do that. So it's a nonsense criticism.
I think what they mean is it's unnecessary. It's been done for a reason, that's been done for affectation, or it's not required. It doesn't perform a function. Now, we obviously don't agree with that, but it's interesting. The language is different. You can tell the language is different. The second thing, and this is where your earlier comment about motorists comes back. Second, stop the war on motorists. And then they say, we're going to legislate to ban all ULEZs, so ultra-low emission zones, all LTNs. We will scrap the ban on selling petrol and diesel cars. If you remember that by 2030, as part of the net zero,
2035, didn't they, I think?
And they're going to basically forget that, scrap that. I mean, in Reform's contract, when they're talking about energy, they're basically going to drop all commitments to net zero. Finish it, kill it, right? And they're going to scrap legal requirements for manufacturers to sell electric cars. And then the third one is accelerate already announced transport infrastructure. Focus on the north. Now, I presume they mean NPR, Northern Powerhouse Rail, and so on. And then they've got this truly remarkable savings table. Now, this is what I was going to make a comment about reform generally. I've been reading these sort of manifestos, whatever, for a long, long time now, and they sometimes can drive you to, sleep. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like the reform one. I'm prefacing this by saying I'm not offering a view on it, other than to say, from a purely dispassionate, quite apolitical perspective, it is different. And it's I would say, from an academic point of view, it's worth a read. You'll draw your own conclusion. You might be absolutely screaming and whatever. I'm not suggesting what your reaction will be, but it's worth a read, because there's a savings table where they're actually claim they're going to save 150 billion a year. It really is quite the thing.
But it really does fit right in with the populist stuff that's sweeping Europe, which, of course, was largely started by Trump, doesn't it? This sort of thing has a knack of appealing to people.
What is very surprising, well, what's surprising about this is 20 years ago, we'd have all kind of gone, okay, right, turn up the medication, maybe.
Let's look at the main parties again, which is what the main parties are hoping.
But this party is polling higher than the Conservatives, right? So it is interesting. I think we're seeing a change in the political landscape.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's interesting. On transport, no, I think it's tosh. But
politically,
that's, yeah. But, it's, well, no, from a transport point of view, I mean, the one thing you can say about these people is they get what comms people will call cut through. I mean, people do kind of go.
And the thing about it is, we've got a bloke who has not won, who has lost in 7 successive attempts to win a seat in Parliament, stood there last night or the night before saying in 5 years he is aiming to be Prime Minister.
We live in interesting times.
Interesting times, barking mad times, some others might say, because it's quite concerning in some ways, but let's stick to transport. Finally, we come to the Greens, as we aren't doing the SNP or Plaid Cymru, seen as transport is a largely devolved matter for both of them to various degrees. Surely, Richard, some sort of progressive stuff from the party that ought to be the most pro-public transport of all. Yay or nay?
Well, that's a great lead-in, but I have to say their manifesto is remarkably flat, really. They don't, I mean, their intro to the rail bit is to say privatisation of the railways has failed. Well, that's a view that many share. We've all experienced the decline in the standard of services, strikes, and growing dissatisfaction. Can't really argue with that. The railway should be the backbone of a sustainable transport system. Well, we agree with that, right? So then they say what they're going to do, and it's very odd. So they say, I'll just read this through very quickly, right? Investment in a modern, efficient, publicly owned railway with affordable fares. What does that mean? We're back to that affordable thing. You know, different people have different views, so that's unclear. Greater investment in more rapid electrification so the rail network can be powered sustainably. Well, that's a bit of an issue because you're opposed to nuclear, for example, so I'm not sure where all the juice is coming from, but there you go. This one's my favourite. A national strategic approach.
Strategic.
I knew you'd like this. A national strategic approach to identifying those lines and stations which could be reopened. Do not say Skipton Cone, right? This should be led by regional and local government to ensure the most benefits. How the hell can a national strategic approach be led by local government? It makes no sense, that at all.
It's just gibberish, isn't it?
It is. And then finally, this one is brilliant. So read the Green Manifesto. First person to actually explain the grammatical structure of this sentence might even be in line for a mug. Right? They say, train companies to be gradually brought back into public ownership as existing contracts expire, and rolling stock, which is currently owned by a leasing company, needs replacement. I've read that multiple times, and I still can't quite work out how that's supposed to work. But anyway, they're going to cancel Trident, the replacement for Trident, to help pay for all of this. So I just kind of, it's kind of welcome to student union politics 2024 for me, really. It's just, it didn't really make any sense. There you go. I was left somewhat
underwhelmed.
Bemused. Yeah, underwhelmed.
Underwhelmed.
Yeah.
Well, so let's try and draw the threads together on that melange of transport. That's
a good word. I like that word. Melange.
You have to imagine Kenneth Williams saying it for full humour value. He'd have really got it. So it is fair to say, that only the Conservatives and Labour have credible, considered plans with actual detail, whether or not you agree with them.
I think that is fair. Some will say, the Lib Dem says all the right things. It does, but it's back to that point about it's a little bit sponge-like. It's a bit sort of motherhood and apple pie, I think, is you can't argue with anything, but what it actually says in detail is harder to say. So I think what you've just said there is broadly right. I suppose we should be grateful at one level, and probably the only level, to Reform for producing something so angry, really. It actually gave us something to talk about and made reading this stuff a little less dreary than it otherwise might have been. There's one final manifesto we should probably mention, and that's the Railway Industry Association.
Yes,
RIA.
Indeed, they did.
They published their own manifesto for rail on behalf of their members. We'll put a link to the website.
It's worth reading.
It is worth a read. It's got sort of 5 key points. You could say, well, they're pretty obvious, but sometimes obvious is actually right. So it's publish a long-term rail strategy, deliver on industry reform, accelerate new train orders, low-carbon network upgrades, 4, support a sustainable supply chain, and 5, leverage private investment. Again, you might have different perspectives on some of it, but it's good to see the industry going, well, this is what we think we should be doing, and doing it fairly clear. So,
RIA,
well done, RIA.
RIA seems to be doing a good job, really. Darren Kaplan's leading from the front and promoting discussion. For many years, it was quite a dusty organisation, which didn't seem to get much coverage, but they're Well done, Darren and his team.
Well done indeed. So, I mean, what's your view? You has that caused you to think that transport will be an election issue this time, or
well, it never
maybe
is
not?
Traditionally, is it? I actually can't see it by the time we get to it. Nobody's going to say I'm going to vote for them because they're going to cancel the rest of HS2. The one thing that might catch people's eyes is a £2 bus fare, which I agree with you is a really good thing. But the rest of it,
by the way, I can't see Labour not doing that as well, because the idea of sort of cutting back on that at the time that we're trying to promote more bus services, but it is a good thing.
If you're going to put me back against the wall and ask for a conclusion, of the lot of them, as we said at the time, I think Labour's plan holds the most water. And this is just a general observation from somebody who's been watching politics for a long time. I don't know whether you saw it the other day, but Keir Starmer and his shadow chancellor were at Southampton.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought, for the first time, I looked at him, I thought, you're actually sounding prime ministerial. And they were starting to get that aura of looking like a government in waiting, which any opposition that's got to win has got to look like. For the first time, I thought they did.
Well, look, I would agree that on the rail policy point of view, it's the one that grabs the eye because it does feel like a plan. And I don't think it is an ideologically driven plan. I think it is actually quite practical. There might be elements of ideology in there, of course, but I think it's fairly practical. And, you and I both are of the view we do need to get a bit more of a grip, and it's probably the one that
I just meant in terms of an overall feel to how there's that whole saying in politics, isn't it? You can't measure momentum, but you can certainly feel it.
Yeah,
and it certainly feels as though they're getting some momentum, and that's just an observation. It's not a political point, beyond that. But
well, I hope that people will let us know what they think. I mean, folks will have read these things and be fascinated to know what people's views are on the manifestos. Do you feel, listeners, that one is better than the other? Have we got this wrong? Have we made some fair points? It'd be great to know what people think.
Anyway, while we're in the realms of flights of fancy, shall we do the quiz?
Yeah, do you just work out a new insult for each week?
Yeah,
pretty much.
Because this one, I thought, how can I describe this one? And this is meant to be a compliment now coming up.
Oh, okay.
I thought sneak is the wrong word. What I thought you did in this particular question was employ the skill which we've seen, if your memories are old enough, from David Nixon and Paul Daniels, and that's you deftly use the power of misdirection to send them all running off in vaguely the right but totally the wrong direction, which takes some doing. So I do take my hat off to you for that.
I need to sit down.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Well, anyway, as you say, maybe the first and obvious right answer was not necessarily the correct answer. Anyway, these mugs are becoming highly sought after.
They are,
by the way. So
do we need to order any more yet?
I think. We've gone through. I bought 2 boxes, and we're through 1 box now. So yes, at some point we're going to have to order another box of mugs.
Do we change the design slightly so they become even more collectible?
Oh, so that the first editions are the ones to have. That's not a bad shout. Okay, I like that. Right, in which case, getting your hands on one of these first edition mugs really is a highly prized thing. So what was the question, the misdirecting question from last week? Well, we said, who said what was an act of malice and Philistinism? Philistinism?
Philistinism. That's what gave me the clue, and which sent them all galloping in the wrong direction.
Well, a lot of people said Sir John Betjeman, writing about the destruction of the Doric Arch at Euston, which wasn't an arch.
Well, the thing is, Philistinism gave me the cue. I thought he must be talking about the Doric Arch, therefore it must be Betjeman.
Yeah. In fact, if you don't get a mug, but if anybody can send us a comment saying it's not an arch, right? What is it?
It's a proper.
Yeah, you see. Well, yeah, but you didn't finish it, so that's okay, right? Anyway, it wasn't Sir John Betjeman. The Architectural Review magazine, of which Sir John had been an assistant editor, I think in the 1930s, described it as an act of apathy and Philistinism. So I believe the correct answer is the late Gavin Stamp, the eminent architectural historian right, who, when writing in his 2007 book, Britain's Lost Cities, described the loss of the arch as an act of malice and Philistinism. So the answer was Gavin Stamp, talking about the Euston Arch. So quite a few people did get it right, actually. And the winner is David Hudson. Sorry, David Hudson, who entered by email. So, David, please email us again at info@greensignals.org to tell us where you would like your mug sent, and we will get it on its way to you. So there you go.
Well, good question, Richard. Gavin Stamp actually is a very, very good, or was a very, very good writer. I've got a lovely book somewhere where he talks about our lost Victorian heritage in terms of buildings. And it's a very sad but inspiring book. I don't know whether Blackburn had one, but Burnley had a wonderful Victorian market hall, which was flattened. And he lists lots of things like that, and churches and town halls and country houses from the Victorian
era. And he doesn't
era.
hold back, you know. I mean, he apportions blame wide and far.
Yeah.
So the person he holds the most responsible ultimately for the Euston Arch is actually Harold Macmillan, who was Prime Minister at the time, and describes him, I think, in the same book as a murderer for doing that. So yeah, he's pretty direct. Anyway, this week's question is very different.
Go on.
So do you like anagrams? And do you like cryptic crosswords?
You've just stumbled on it. My mum used to love crosswords. I haven't got that kind of a brain, Richard. I really haven't. But for me to get a crossword clue, it would have to be something like Old MacDonald had a.
Okay, yeah, right.
So no to your anagrams.
Okay, so this one you do have to think laterally. Where, and it's a British Railways geography question, right? So this isn't totally random. This is about British rail geography. Where would I be if I were between a wettish hall and an adhering body?
That is a crossword clue.
So where would I be if I was between a wettish hall and an adhering body?
Oh, I don't know.
If you think you know, emailers, YouTubers, whatever your chosen thing, deadline is midday on Saturday. Heavens, what day is it on Saturday? I can't lose track.
It must be the 20th.
No, it must be the 22nd. It must be the 22nd.
It is, because you and me will be at the Festiniog.
Oh, so we will. Right, so Saturday the 22nd of June at midday. You don't have to be first. You just have to be in time for that. If you are emailing us or commenting to us from other parts of the world, you can still participate, and we will take account of the time zones. But there you go. Right. Okay. So that's the plan. There you go. That's the quiz for this week.
Excellent.
Nigel, one interesting bit of news follow-up, I guess. Do you remember a few weeks ago we were talking about Wi-Fi on trains?
Oh, we
were
did,
both
yes. Good
quite
discussion.
Excited about the tech. Well, following that, I had a call from a guy called Mike Gray, who is a specialist in IT and on-train systems, and he said, "I'd love to come and talk to you a little bit about some of what we're doing." And I thought that'd be really interesting. So this is what Mike had to say. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Gray, who is, I think, been called, you've had a number of sort of roles, the way things are described, Mike. I know IT workstream lead on rail projects. You've been chief information officer, mobile comm specialist. It sounds like you're the guy that knows about what we all want to hear, is how do we get better Wi-Fi and signals onto trains. So thanks for joining us on Green Signals. I suppose just to kick off, can you just, I know, you can't talk about specific projects for obvious reasons. I mean, we completely respect that. But just in general terms, what are the kind of things over the last 10 years when you've been doing this that you've been looking at, and just in general terms?
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me on, by the way. So this has been a problem that I've worked on for at least the last 10 years through various different railway franchise bids that I worked on as a specialist, and for some national government projects that have been going on since. Getting Wi-Fi onto trains is a very political topic. The government and ministers have wanted to see Wi-Fi improve for a very long time. And if in truth, it's never really been a technological issue. It's always been a financial and political one as to who should pay for the right technology to deliver the job. So just very briefly, what we're talking about. So there are two very distinct things when it comes to connectivity on trains that passengers care about. One is the Wi-Fi, which is the visible end of it, the bit you log on to when you get on the train, and you then use a bit like you use in your home. That's around half of what passengers are looking for when they talk about mobile connectivity. The other half of it is what happens with their mobile phone. So if they want to make a phone call, then they're connecting to the mobile network operators, Vodafone, etc., EE, and they're using the mobile phone, basically phone connecting out the window of the train to the mast that's flying past. So when we talk to passengers and interested parties about this, they sometimes use those terms interchangeably, and passengers at this point in time don't not care, but their interests are, I want to connect. I want to use my device. I want to use it in the way that I want to use it. The other thing that's worth remembering is that trains' need states differ. So if you're on a Southwest Trains service between London and Guildford, which is a bit packed full at times, the chance of you getting your laptop up and doing loads of work, unless you've got a seat and a table, is pretty low. So actually what you're trying to do there is more on your phone, standing up, social media type stuff. So that's a very different need state to the one that you'd find on a long distance intercity train, where a passenger does have a seat typically, and because it reserved seats most of the time, and they've got a nice comfortable space, they're on there for a few hours. So you find that what they want to do with that time is quite different to the shorter commuter routes. So your passenger need state and want for connectivity does change. It's also how much data they can download. Are they being limited by the on-train Wi-Fi or their network provider? And then how long does that data take to download, which is called latency. So all those three things sum to what we describe as the passenger experience on a moving train or an aeroplane or anything that is connecting to the internet.
I was going to say that. I think the aeroplane's an interesting example, because having just recently got off one that had the ability to have Wi-Fi working quite well at 35,000 feet and I suspect about 500 miles an hour, I was sort of thinking, how can we do that? But yet we don't seem to be able to do it effectively on train. But I think you're saying, well, we can. The technology is there, and maybe we should go on and just understand what that technology looks like. It's really just about how much money it's going to cost and who pays.
There's two parts to the answer to that question, right? So the fact that you've had that wonderful experience in the aircraft is testament to some big changes that have happened with companies like SpaceX and Starlink and the OneWeb satellite constellations. Those are very different technical solutions to the satellite solutions we've had, like Inmarsat in the past. Starlink is a game-changing technology in a lot of respects, in that it delivers very high levels of bandwidth at very low levels of latency for a very small amount of money, which is exactly what you need in a transport operation if you're trying to drive onboard Wi-Fi. We'll come on to how that affects trains in a second. But your experience on an airliner, if you think about it, you're flying up there in the sky with your Starlink antenna strapped to the roof. You're practically speaking a lot closer to the satellites, if I'm being honest, right? So your distance between your antenna and your satellites is a lot shorter, and that does matter. And there's not much in your way, because that airline is up in the free sky. There's no trees, there's no bridges, there's no tunnels. And people assume that when we talk satellite, we mean it's straight up, isn't it? No, satellites that we talk to are actually typically on the horizon or just above. So particularly in countries like the UK, where they're typically equatorial, you've got to consider what's in your way, not just above you, but also to the side of you, because that's where the satellite you're talking to is typically in that direction. And airliners don't suffer from that. So Starlink on planes is actually relatively new, and it's growing very quickly because there's a nice little Starlink antenna you can put on your plane. It's airline certified, and the data package that Starlink provide around that antenna is very, very cost competitive. So Wi-Fi on planes is going to become a much more common and usable thing, which then brings you onto the train. Well, if you can do it for a plane, then it must be easy to do on a train, right? There's a couple of challenges we've kind of touched on already. The first one being we need a Starlink antenna that can be fitted to a train. Well, in the last few months, then we have started to see those come through. There's been a couple of different iterations of Starlink antenna you can put on trains, and there's one that's occurred in the last few months, which is a nice small, very thin, very low profile antenna, which it's feasible to now fit onto a UK train with UK loading gauge and effectively supplement some of the mobile phone antenna we have strapped to the roof and switch the two things out. And that can be used as a different mechanism for getting connectivity from the satellites into the train. And as we speak, there is a train operator who has got some government funding to actually test this. And there is a run between London and a town in the northeast that you can go on this particular train. I actually know the number of it, and you can sit down and experience satellite connectivity.
So Starlink is the thing owned by SpaceX, Elon Musk's operation, low Earth orbit satellite mesh. I use it at home. It's transformed rural broadband experience, because instead of the 2 megabits per second I used to get from a well-known legacy infrastructure provider of telecommunications to domestic properties, this is, I think, 150 megabits per second. It's transformational, and it costs me relatively very little money. So problem solved. Surely, if this trial's working in a way you described, and it does work for the amount of money it must be, we just get it out everywhere. And surely that's a relatively straightforward decision.
Well, for a change, that might be true. Just for a change, we might actually have that set of circumstances. I've worked in there a long time, and to be in this position where there is a technical solution that is capable of delivering the connectivity and at a cost that we can afford. And by cost, I mean it's affordable by a transport operator to finance within their own means, right? Sure. I don't need to ask the FT or central government for huge amounts of cash. That means actually we might have a solution that will work. This is kind of a first for this sector. It's got a bit of way to go before we're there, but we're certainly looking at something that's got high potential.
Mike, I think people are going to listen to this and go, that sounds fantastic. Some good news at once. So let's just hope that the trial works out well and we can see some of these systems start to be deployed. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight and your time.
Thank you, Richard. Pleasure.
So what do you think of that?
Anything that talk by experts about how to improve Wi-Fi on trains has got to be a good thing. And we need it. As we said at the time, Wi-Fi is one of those hygiene factors that people just expect, like you expect your own ensuite in a hotel. So more power to Mike's elbow in spreading the word.
And what was remarkable about it is this revelation that the technology is here now. I mean, I use this Starlink technology, as I said, on the piece. And if you can actually get a form factor, the actual size of the thing that will fit on a train and deliver what he's saying, and it's here now. Now it's just about money and will. I think we probably would all agree. Well, let's crack on then.
Oh, absolutely. It's essential. Now, for some really brilliant news. Alstom has signed a £370 million contract for 10 Aventra trains for the Elizabeth line. And this is the order that Alstom needed to protect Derby Litchurch Lane works from closure, and is exactly what Alstom MD Nick Crossfield told us they needed when Richard interviewed him a few weeks ago. And this contract, which Green Signals has argued consistently for, is for 10 new 9-car trains and the associated maintenance. 220.5 million is from the DfT for the new trains, and the remainder of the 370 million is for train maintenance under contract from TfL until 2046. Now, it's been known for some time that the incredible passenger demand on the Elizabeth line would mean the current fleet of 70 345 Aventras would be insufficient to meet demand in the next few years. So this is good news both for Alstom and everyone in Derby. And by everyone in Derby, can we add the surrounding area for the supply chain, which is really important. But it's also crucial for capacity in London. And I think it's fair to say that we did play a bit of a part in this decision, wouldn't you?
Well, it was wonderful to interview Nick. It certainly was quite dramatic at the time, I remember, because the thing that was, I think, blew us both away was how many conversations there'd been, and I suppose lost opportunities as well with the Irish contract and then And then hopefully what this will allow to happen is that the Odessia platform will be committed to Derby.
Yes, I'd forgotten that.
It's a really important point, that. Yeah. Look, there's an election obviously on at the moment, so we can't do too much, but hopefully in due course we'll be able to pop up and go and have a chat. And but it's absolutely it's brilliant news.
Can I
it's
ask
really,
you
really
something?
good,
because I genuinely don't know the answer to this. I thought they couldn't do this sort of thing in Purda. I thought the Secretary of State couldn't make that sort of decision because it could be, vote for us, we rescued Derby.
Well, do you remember we had the conversation at this very point with Scotland, and most people sort of leapt straight onto YouTube, whatever, said, because it's a devolved matter, and
this isn't.
Precisely. I think it is interesting. I mean, there's a little bit of me goes, it was the right thing to do and it was absolutely essential, so ask for forgiveness, not for permission. But your question's a really good one. It did sort of cross my mind as how is it possible? But it's the right thing to do, so maybe that's why it was possible. Okay. I don't know.
Well, there's an old saying in that there's never a wrong time to do the right thing.
That's actually a very good point. By the way, I know we're coming towards the end of the programme, but you did mention that we're at the Festinio Railway. I'm seriously looking forward to that.
I did. It'll be my third, if not fourth, trip on the Gravity train, but you're
Gravity
first.
Train. It's the first one, taking all the camera gear as well. If you haven't seen Nigel's video of his trip on the Gravity train, it's an absolute cracker. We'll put a link to that in the description. Definitely worth a watch because it's just crazy. I'm actually very excited. I don't normally care about the weather, but I am really hoping for fine weather because it's quite exposed, isn't it?
You do not want it pouring with rain for one of them. No. Just one comment to that. We're also going to be lucky enough to interview the Festiniog Welsh Highland Railway General Manager Paul Lewin for our emerging programme on the heritage scene, which is becoming more more difficult. I was looking at a magazine yesterday which says the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway have announced that over the next 10 years they need £30 million for essential.
30?
Yeah. And I think in that particular issue of that magazine, there are half a dozen railways launching big survival appeals. So it's going to be really interesting to talk to Paul. So
it is. It is. No, good point. Good point.
Who I think is now vice chair of the Heritage Railway Association. Have I got that right?
He's certainly heavily involved in that. So he's very knowledgeable, very experienced, and as we know, very successful in doing what he's done at up in North Wales. So should be terrific.
To turn the Festinio Welsh Highland, as spectacular as they are, into the success that he has, when you can't guarantee any sort of passing trade, it's a real achievement.
Yeah.
So, sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Please do the usual and add the likes. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. They're surging ahead of our subscriptions at the minute, and it's good to have so many friends. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and do join us again next week when we'll be able to update the rapidly moving target of what's happening in the general election and any rail news that we're doing. So thanks for your company today, and it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
See you next week. Bye now.